after having discussing about the benefits of the European sports model. We are going to discuss about the legal parts and the legal framework behind this. So I will call once again our brilliant Merin to moderate this panel. And I will call also Franck Latty, professor of international law at University Paris-Nanterre, Mr. José Rivas, partner at Bird & Bird. Maybe just the last seat, finally, sorry. Sorry, Mr. Vanja Smokvina, associate professor at the University of Rijeka, Faculty of Law, Croatia, and Mr. José Manuel Araujo, lawyer and chair of the EU Commission at the European Olympic Committee. Welcome, thank you, and Merin, you have the floor.
Brilliant, thank you so much, Christophe. I'm going to start with another caveat that I am not a lawyer, if it wasn't obvious from the first session. So I'm very glad to have such a brilliant and I think very brainy panel. So I might, I think, hopefully ask the questions a little bit slower this time and also get you guys to elaborate on various issues that maybe for someone who's a novice or not such an expert into the legal mechanisms of the sports model would be interested in. So I know the article is coming up will be a sort of focus, maybe an initial focus of this discussion, and I've got it written down here because I don't want to be the kind of journalist who doesn't know her treaty articles well enough. And I think maybe it's helpful, Frank, if we could set out what Article 156 says about the European sports model, if there's any reference to a pyramid, why it's been interpreted in the particular way that we've been discussing it already today, which is a pyramid. And also maybe, I think Ian mentioned it in the last panel, how did this article come about in the Treaty for the Functioning of the European Union? It's a relatively novel edition.
Okay. Thank you for this first question. Maybe I can read the provision of Article 165 of the Treaty on the Functioning of the European Union. Paragraph 1 and second line, the Union shall contribute to the promotion of European sporting issues while taking into account the specific nature of sport, its structures based on voluntary activity and its social and educational function. So this provision was introduced in the treaty through the Treaty of Lisbon in 2009. And so before that time, there was no reference to sports in the European treaties. So it was the first time that the word sport was introduced in the treaty. But previously, of course, there were some cases before the European Court of Justice, Bosman case, not to say the least. And also the European Commission, for example, worked on sports, and there were some political declarations by governments in favor of the social aspects of sports. So this provision is the result of these political actions, I would say, of governments. I'm not sure that there is a direct link between the Bosman case, for example, and this provision. Historically, sorry, it's more about the putting into words the different political actions by the governments or by the European Commission on the European model of sports. And there was a study by the European Commission on the European sports model that was released some years before. So this provision, as you can hear, does not mention the European sports model and doesn't mention the football pyramid. So it's an interpretation, and this interpretation was made by the Advocate General in the Super League case, when it said that this provision is constitutionalizing, as Matteo said before, is constitutionalizing the European model of sports, which includes the football pyramid. So this is not in the text, But it's an interpretation. I'm quite convinced by this interpretation, but it's not the pure wording of the text.
If in the final judgment this language that the AG used is repeated, is that the first real moment of constitutionalization of the model and the pyramid? Are there any other precedents where it's been mentioned as a legal precedent by the court?
So far, the court has not paid much attention to this provision. There are some references in some cases, in the Olympique Lyonnais, for example, but just paid the lip service, I would say. But there was no real construction on this provision. And what the court applied are the general rules of competition law, which allows some justification, but it did not especially refer to this provision. So maybe in the Super League case, if the court follows what the Advocate General said, maybe then it will have to be more specific about this provision in the treaty, which it has not really done so far.
Vanya, maybe I can go to you about what the significance of the judgment might be, and also whether the notion of specificity will be included. And actually, even if for those of us who don't know, what is the sort of underpinnings for what specificity with regards to sport has come to mean in an EU legal context?
Well, it's hard to say what would be the result of the case. I think we are all sitting here, we have friends that are online following this important event, and firstly I would like to congratulate the organizers for making this wonderful, wonderful event, so really well done. If I may say, maybe I shouldn't say that, but we should praise the European Super League and the A22 for initiate the procedure, because now we are all speaking about the European model of sport. We are all speaking about the football pyramid. They achieved the result of uniting people around some elementary values, the values of solidarity, the values of the European model of sport, of promoting fairness, openness. We have now the supporters whose voice is being heard. We have the clubs association. We all know about the ECA, but now we have also the Union of European Clubs as a new emerging association, a new stakeholder. Of course, we have FIFPro Europe. So all those stakeholders are part of the so-called pyramid. And I'm not praising UEFA, but I must say that UEFA is giving praise, and it's giving a hand for future collaboration to the stakeholders. Unfortunately, we can't say, and we can't see that in some other sports. We're speaking about the European model of sport, but it seems that we are speaking about the European football model of sport. And we know that we have a lot of sports. It's sad that in other sports, we don't have such an issue of potential solidarity or redistribution of revenues. There are some exceptions, but generally, it's sad what happened in basketball. It's my opinion that it's a sad story that happened over there. But in the end, I think this case will help the European model of sport in any way. Probably, it's hard to say that the court will follow 100% what Advocate General wrote in his opinion. But in any way, I think it's good that we are discussing that. It's good that I read that, I think 2 months ago, the FIBA Europe, they were discussing what's going on about the European model of sport, and they see an opportunity for making better governance in basketball. The problem of the last panel is that a lot of nice things have been already said, And what Matteo said before, good governance is I think is the clue. And here, UEFA is doing a lot.
Maybe on the point about away from football, Jose Manuel, how closely are you watching what happens in this case? And do you think it could provide a constitutional protection for Olympic sports and has a direct spillover for the way that Olympic sports are done in Europe and the governance around Olympic sports? Or is it much more, you will have to interpret what this might mean for you? Or is it more, as I said, is it more direct influence on how you do your business?
Well, first of all, thanks for inviting me to be in this conference. Obviously, I'm representing here, I'm a lawyer, but mainly I'm representing European Olympic committees that are following this case very closely. In fact, this is not the case of football. This is the case for the whole sports, non-Olympic and Olympic. Obviously, we are dealing with the Olympic sports, but as you know, European Olympic committees will organize the third European Games in Krakow, in Poland, and we will have many non-Olympic disciplines and sports. So basically, this is the moment where we can get confirmation of this recognition of the European dimension of sport. That's the correct wording in the treaty. European dimension of sport, you can interpret it a little bit different, but this is the moment where we see that football can the issue is there. Superliga is something that all the people understand, but we want to have this decision in order to all European federations can be legitimate to continue their work in order to guarantee this solidarity system, to guarantee the work they are doing. Well, basically the idea is that if we do this, if we have this consecrated this pyramid system, this solidarity system, then we can see that all European federations, all national federations can continue their work. So that's why we are concerned at the level of the European Olympic committees, because if the court goes in the same way of this Ranto's opinion, that will give us all sport in Europe the capacity to keep on working, using that important tool that is good governance in national federations and European federations, and we have to deal with this very carefully, because by the end, if we do not have this recognition, that could be a big confusion, because we have to understand that we should have some flexibility. When we talk about football, about UEFA, about Champions League, we see other team sports following the same ideal. Let's see EHF Champions League, the European Handball Federation. We can see other sports. They have different approaches, like gymnastics, judo. Judo has, the Grand Slams, these competitions, they are completely, the calendars for the International Federation and the European Federation and the national federations is completely okay, completely settled. So this is important that IFJ feels that the work done is okay, and then the replica for the European sport and for the national sport in Europe is the same. So that's why we are following this very attentively, and for us it's very important that we can have this decision as soon as possible in order to give them this possibility.
Thank you. To the other Jose, is there a danger that if the judgment is as unequivocal as the opinion, that it could cement the status quo as we know it, and then, as Jose Manuel said, maybe sort of shut the door on alternatives or flexibilities in models, because effectively the court has said this is the way we do things, this is the way we're going to do things, and that will deter innovation, different forms of creativity and formats of other types of sports?
Well, I don't think that the court is going to say that. And the reason is because the court has not been asked that. At the end of the day, and I'm going to take a different angle to what has been said up to now. I'm going to talk about the application of competition law in the field of sports, and in particular, because it's the case at hand, in football. As you can imagine, Articles 101, 102, 85, at the time 86, have been there for 60 years. So this is not the first time that competition law applies to a sport. And if it is not the first time that competition law applies to a sport, to the governing, to the running of a sport, the court must have said something about this already. And I think it has. Matteo stole the thunder with the white paper of 2007. Already the commission there analyzed the case law. But we have had competition law cases in the field of sport, Motoe, we have had Meca Medina. There have been many pronouncements of the courts. What does this mean? What does it mean, the application of competition law in this area? Well, at the end of the day, what it means, and what the court is likely to confirm following the opinion of Rantos, is that there are certain restrictions in order to organize a sport, and in order to organize a sport in Europe is following the European model, that are not caught by Articles 101 and 102. And this is the big surprise. But this has already been said. The pyramidal structure, I checked the case law. Advocate General Cocotte in Motoe already talks about the pyramidal structure. Rantos obviously makes a summary of what does that mean. And what it means is that provided the rules pursue a legitimate objective. Here is a difficult question. What is a legitimate objective? How many legitimate objectives do we have? What is part and parcel of the legitimate objectives of a sport? Well, that will depend to start with each individual sport. Provided they pursue that legitimate objective, and provided they do it in a proportionate manner. Proportionate means, in the legal world, the least restrictive means to achieve that result. Those situations are not caught by Article 101 and 102. So this is what, if the court follows the Advocate General, is going to decide. And one fundamental question, one of those objectives that needs to be decided, is it a legitimate objective to admit who? Well, to admit someone that undermines the objectives of the sport, as I understand it, would be nonsense. Therefore, a sport federation confronted with a situation that somebody wants to enter, participate, if doesn't want to participate, is free to remain outside. But if wants to participate, will have to respect the rules of the game. And provided those rules pursue a legitimate objective and are proportionate, there is nothing wrong with it. This is what ultimately means to me, from a competition law point of view, the pyramidal structure, the specificities of a sport from the point of view of competition law.
So do you think, speaking about the constitutionality or the constitutional moment that it could be, is actually just overhyping almost what could happen in a couple of months, and it's better, as you said, to actually stick to what the court's been asked and what answer they will give? And as Ian mentioned, it might be very caveated and very long to read and full of other types of dissent. Like, should we not put too much pressure on this moment, is what it could mean
well,
for the sportsmen?
The pressure is put because it is there, and because we are talking about football. I mean, and that is a fact. It is a fact of life. But yes, my view is that this is very sexy because the sport in which it is happening, it is very sexy, but I can find traces in the case law as it stands today to say, well, this is the legal framework of analysis. What is interesting is that very little has been debated about the details. We're talking about, is the legal framework valid or not? To me, that decision had already been taken by the case law. What still remains to be decided is, are all the rules of the governing bodies of the sport correct? And the answer is no. In fact, the opinion of Advocate General Rantos in paragraph 121 already says there is one rule, and he says this is not proportionate. To prohibit or to impose sanctions on the football players is disproportionate. I was hoping that the debate that we would be having at European level now would be more this, rather than to go back and question the legal framework. To me, the legal framework was already there. There are valid grounds to maintain that the court has said what is that legal framework. The question is the individual application of that framework, where I think probably next year in this conference, I hope that that is what we will be debating. Is this rule in horse jumping? Is that rule in athletics? That is where the debate should be done. I am probably more optimistic than you have heard up to now, but I think that yes, that European framework has already been recognized by the case law of the court.
Does anyone want to jump in? Yeah, Frank?
Of course, I agree with you, but what is interesting is that in the opinion, there's a lot about Article 165, which according to was not necessary because there are already the general regime concerning legitimate objective, the proportionality test. So why so much time spent on this provision? And to my mind, it's because maybe under the general regime, maybe the case is not that sure. Maybe there is a risk. And I think that the Advocate General considered that it was time to insist on this provision, on Article 169, because it was a way to give more weight to the European sports model, to take it more into consideration because of this provision, which and it says that the two articles on competition law should not be interpreted in isolation, but the European treaties must be interpreted as a whole, and there is this provision that gives weight to the European sports model. This is my interpretation.
Absolutely. I may have put too much weight on. Of course, it's an article that was introduced in the treaty, so it must mean something. And I think that is what Rantos does. He encapsulates what is the constitutional dimension of that article. I'm not going to diminish the value of the article at all, no.
Fanny, do you want to come in on this? Or?
Well, just the constitutionalization of the Article 165 from the legal point of view, it's really a hard word. Maybe too strong. I think Advocate General was very, I think he made that on purpose. He wrote especially that, the constitutionalization of Article 165, and but the legal experts, the academics, when the opinion was made public, first they all jumped about that, constitutionalization of 165. We remember that we have a try about the constitutional treaty, but unfortunately it hasn't passed because the member states has been unable to make a decision, and then we had the Lisbon Treaty, and thanks to the Lisbon Treaty we have the 165 article. So from this point, I like the approach to be optimistic and try to put this article as a base of everything what you said. So I agree with my colleagues that the 165 is actually an article that is important to pass to the settled case law of the competition law, EU competition law.
I think people in my profession are also guilty of using hyperbole when it comes to some ECJ decisions, and every landmark decision is another step towards the constitutionalization of the treaty. I remember, I think maybe the case on Article 50 when it was heard at the ECJ and the member states lost was also considered to be one step closer to a federal or US way of thinking about what the treaty is. So yeah, maybe we should turn it down a little bit. In more, I think, parochial terms, Vanya, I want to talk about pre-authorization. What is it, and why is that the system that we have in place today?
Well, the pre-authorization is actually a rule set. We see in the opinion, but we know that in FIFA and UEFA regulations, you have a rule that gives the right to FIFA and UEFA to pre-authorize any competition. And those competitions are not just competition of clubs, competition between member states, so the association, and so on. And if we took this in the framework of the pyramid of the concept of one federation per sport, it's obvious that we must have one federation that will settle the rules, and they did this. They settled the rules, and they said, okay, if you would play football in the organized football, like UEFA says, you must play according to the rules. And like Jose said, if you don't want to play on those rules, you're free to play somewhere else. But then, what will we have? I think that those clubs that have been commented today, some of them unfortunately face again some judicial problems. In that regard, I don't see a place for something like that, because they wanted a bigger pie than they already have. And today it was mentioned a few times that we have the G14 initiative going on for years, and this is a G14 in the, I don't know, 20th version actually, but it's called the European Super League. So, in the case, the Advocate General said the pre-authorization rules are something that is needed for the preservation of the system. And if you want to stay in the system, you should play according to the rules, as you said.
Jose Manuel, how does pre-authorization work in a specific example? Are you happy with that system? Does it give you a framework to protect the integrity of Olympic sports in Europe?
Yes, in fact. I'd just like to not forget that topic about the constitutionalization of the European model of sport. I would like to tell you that also for us it's important that later, after this case is finished, probably we have another environment to change Article 165 and then to get this confirmation of this perception. I don't know when we are going to do this, but that's a chance.
We'll need another conference on treaty change if it's going to happen,
yeah,
I think.
I'm
available.
In 20 years. But another thing that is important is what Jose Rivas mentioned about the athletes, about the football players that are going to be sanctioned by UEFA. This is what I was referring about the good governance principles in International Olympic Committee, EOC. What we say is that it is important that athletes participate more in the governing bodies of sport organizations. So if this opinion leads to a decision that refers that athletes should not be punished, for us it's important that that all governing bodies of the different sports can understand the participation of athletes in their decisions. That's one of the things that we are following attentively.
Jose Rivas, maybe come in on this point and I'll follow up.
Yes, authorization rules. Let me see whether I can give an example to try to understand the legal logic. And then we try to apply it to football. Imagine I am a federation for cycling. And the day of tomorrow, somebody comes and says, look, we are going to organize a race, and a new model of race, okay? And you know what? We are going to make our cyclists to ride without a helmet. And we want you to authorize our race, and we want you to authorize the cyclists that belong to your federation to participate in our race. Well, wearing a helmet, when I was a kid, cyclists didn't wear a helmet. That may shock many people in the audience, but that was, by the way, the first case on this issue is a Canadian case on ice hockey. The first time that the Canadian Ice Hockey Federation forced the athletes to wear protection and to wear a helmet. Well, if I am responsible for the sport, I will have something to say. I say, look, sorry, I cannot tolerate that somebody plays my sport, participates in my sport, putting their life at risk. And furthermore, I cannot tolerate that my members, this weekend, race with you without a helmet, next weekend, race with me with a helmet. How am I talking about grassroots, how am I going to explain this to a kid of 12, 13? How am I going to explain to the father of that kid, yeah, you can allow him to race tomorrow without a helmet, but next weekend he will have to wear a helmet. This is what cohesion, this is what rules, this is what governance of a sport means, and this is what we're talking about.
So the only way that those two things coexist is if you have a rival federation who has its own cyclists and they operate under their own terms and rules. Without any, like in boxing, we have various federations. They have, proliferation of federations in different types of sports. Okay, I understand that.
But if I may,
sure.
But in boxing, unfortunately, we don't know who's the world champion. So I wouldn't like to have football like boxing. I think in football we know who is the champion, and that's the system. That's why we are saying the European football pyramid. That's it. I think in boxing, unfortunately, with all those federations, they didn't make a step forward. It's a real bad. It was really a bad step forward.
This is a question to anyone who wants to jump in. But is one of the reasons that the football model is being challenged is because the internal rules that UEFA have are under question about whether they are rigorous enough? So we have spending rules, FFP, Manchester City are back in the news not because of UEFA, because they've fallen foul of the Premier League rules, but there was a case. Manchester City managed to, in most, I think, generous interpretation, get away with it. So a lot of these challenges seem to be coming up because the legitimacy of the almost self-governing nature of what football has become is under question because maybe people are losing faith in the rules themselves. Nobody wants to jump in. Go for it.
The self-governing nature of each sport is a reality. What each federation, what is the best for their sport? If you have a problem with some federation that does not apply any rule and is a mess, that's something that we should all focus on solving that situation. And we from Olympic Committee, obviously we are following this kind of situation. But when we talk about the capacity of each federation to organize its own competition, it's quite obvious for me. In fact, I was quoting some examples. Cycling is one example. You have some competitions in Europe, like the Tour de France, Vuelta, and we have athletes from different countries, from different teams, and this is UCI is dealing with this. The European Federation is also approving this. So each sport must be confident to organize as they want, and the rules must be adapted to the sport. So that's the most important, that this independence, this capacity of each national and European federation to organize its own sport.
Well, this is what I referred at the beginning, that I was hoping that we would be discussing this type of issues, individual implementation of the rules, individual application of the rules, because they may not be sufficiently clear, they may be discriminatory, they may not pursue a legitimate objective. All those questions, to me, are perfectly legitimate, and still that work remains to be done. But the debate today, it seems to me, to question the legal framework. This is what I meant by before. To me, the legal framework is relatively clear. The next step is going to be the concrete application of that legal framework. And there is where I believe there are lots of question marks.
Is that a debate that but is it actually being happening in the national level? So, we have self-governance to some degree, but thinking about the UK, where maybe 2 weeks ago the government was going to put out a white paper sort of evaluating the self-governance of the Premier League football. It was delayed because of what happened in Manchester City, but there seems to be more political attention from governments about how their leagues operate and the rules within them. Is that the appropriate arena for this debate to happen, rather than at this sort of legal EU law level? Frank, do you want to?
Every country has its own specificities, and for the example, I know the best. You guess it's the French one. The situation of the national federation is quite specific because there is a kind of a delegation of public service by the states to the federation. So the application of competition law is quite limited, I would say, only to business activities of national federations. But the monopoly of national federation is protected by the law. So we don't really apply competition law to the sporting activities of the national federation, which is quite different at the European level, because there is no legal framework concerning all the sports organizations. So the way for the courts to control the activities of this organization is to go through competition law. And sometimes it's a bit weird, I would say, because if you took the example of anti-doping, this is the Mecca Medina case, the first instance tribunal, or the general court at that time, said that there is this kind of exception concerning anti-doping rules, which should not be subject to competition law. There is this sporting exception. But the court ruled that, on the contrary, every sporting rule is supposed to comply with EU competition law. So my point is that it's quite different at the European level than at the national level. So I don't know what is the best system, but for me, having all the sporting activities under the lens of competition law is not the best solution, I would say. But it's the only way at the European level, or the freedom of movement of persons, capitals, and so on and so forth. But this is the only way for the European Court of Justice to control the activities of the sports organizations.
It's the only way under the current legal framework, I guess, if we speak about progressing the treaty or changing things, then, yeah, but that's a long way off.
Once I heard Advocate General Tesauro saying something like, what you are proposing is almost close to the Bible, to convert water into wine. Articles 101 and 102 are directly applicable. Have they been there? National courts have the competence to apply them. National competition authorities have the competence to apply them. That train is already gone. And we have to accept it. Yes, there are cases at national level.
Is there a danger of the kind of over-politicization of sport in Europe now. So we heard from Matteo, who said actually, having the European sports model is great for the Commission. It's like good PR. We can tweet about, the European values every time it's the Champions League final, etc., which they do. Jose Manuel, are you worried? Do you want European sports to be closely affiliated to EU institutions? And is there a danger that, for example, UEFA is not an EU body, it does represent members that are outside the European Union. How do you kind of square this sort of circle? And would you rather that politicians stop speaking about your sports than sort of bigging you up?
Well, yeah, well, basically what I feel from this about this subject is that, in fact, as you said, UEFA and European Olympic Committees represent much more than EU countries, and but we all at the level of EU must fulfill the legal framework of the European Union, and in fact there is a balance that is not easy for many of them. For most of the European federations, it's if we use EU as a standard, that can be very useful, because we could recognize that these steps were done much before others to think about it. So I'm not. I do not have a fear of the application of EU legislation to national federations in EU countries, and we don't have to fear that EU gives some signs to UEFA or to other European federations in order to fulfill some criteria. So this is not obviously that we have to tackle with these differences, but I'm not worried about or cautious about this situation. I think that in the future, we will talk about the European model of sport, and we will talk about grassroots. And I feel that many, as I was saying, after this case finishes, probably we will have some capacity to have more intervention of European Union in some areas of sport. And I would say this, I'm not claiming, but Erasmus Plus is a program for to support many areas, also sport, a short percentage. I feel that for non-professional sport, we should have something from EU to support this area. We are talking about volunteer people. We are talking about the capacity to involve young youth in sport. So I think that probably if the result is a new approach from EU to sport, that could be good.
So one of the arguments made by the company that's now sort of representing the Super League is that they require the Super League to compete with the real Super League, which they say is the Premier League. So there will be no English clubs or no plans to have English clubs in this new Super League. Do any of you give credence to this argument that actually the iniquities of the way the wealth is distributed has meant that English football is raced to become the most lucrative, the most influential, where all the talent goes, and therefore, in response and to become more competitive, you need something that can have, I think, maybe the credibility and the clout to compete with English Premier League football, which has becoming a Super League. Does this have any legal weight or any, is it an argument which can be defended in any court?
Well, when we speak about the Premier League as a Super League, it's an argument that was also raised yesterday by Adriano Galliani, former AC Milan director, and now he is in head of Monza Calcio. It's a question, it deals with your previous question about national politics. we know that actually the issue about taxation is in hand of the national governments. So if you want to have your national competition be more competitive, you have some opportunities to do that. The Premier League is very much powerful. Yes, they have a lot of revenues. But let's be honest. In sports, in world sports, the global products are the UEFA competitions and are the competitions of the top 5 leagues in football. They are selling around. They make huge profits, and those are extreme powerful products. Today we spoke about the NFL, we spoke about the NBA, we spoke about the National Baseball, or I don't know, other federations. But people around the world watch European football, and that's it. This is the real European product that has a big value in the world. One other thing we didn't have the option to tackle yet, and very shortly, is the issue about the sport governing bodies having the regulatory power and economic power. And in the case, the European Super League is contesting that and saying, well, it's not fair, they have a monopoly situation, they should not have the right to commercialize their regulatory powers. But let's see what happened in tennis with the ITF and the Davis Cup. So they sign a contract with a privately owned company for a 10-year contract. They completely changed the system of the Davis Cup, and after just 1 year or 2 years, they said, well, it's not working. And the company, they said, well, we are not interested anymore. And they left. So, and that could happen in football. It could happen in other sports. You know, the European Super League and the A22 are privately companies. I heard that they have the same address in Madrid. But nobody knows that. Nobody knows who is leading the companies. Nobody knows who is standing behind them. But when you have a sport governing bodies, you know who is the president, you know who is the member of the EXCO, you know. Everything is obvious. So, okay, there is place for better governance and with more involvement of the stakeholders, with maybe a better redistribution of revenues. It could be a better level, but to commercialize everything, I don't see it as a next step in Europe.
Yes, I think your question has to do with the dual role that you are referring to, no? The fact that the regulator also has an interest, an economic interest. Well, the Advocate General deals with the issue, but I would like to refer to 2 words that have been already mentioned. Matteo, you said autonomy in the regulation of the sport can come with conditions. Ian, you said that the federations should be held to a very high standard of European law. This responsibility comes with obligations. And this is not for free. And this is exactly what European law is saying. You have to be particularly careful because some people talk about a situation of conflict of interest. Advocate General uses threat of conflict of interest. But because of that situation, they have to be particularly careful and they have to be exquisite in their way of regulation.
On this point, there was a recent appeal in Madrid, which the company A22 actually won against the ability of the existing body to sanction them. What is the significance of that kind of decision?
Well, the situation in Madrid is quite complicated because there have been several orders. In fact, you are referring to the last one. The last one lifts the interim measures that had been adopted. okay? And basically says, reimposes the interim measures. None of the federations, clubs, Liga, etc., can do anything to put at jeopardy the development of this new Super League. Okay. Now, a couple of observations. To my mind, it is surprising that that order, which happens 1.5 months after the opinion of Advocate General Rantos, does not mention the opinion at all, not once. Even to criticize and to say, look, I disagree for the following reasons. I don't share this point of view or that point of view. To me, that is telling. There is an argument to say, in interim measures, you have to decide the situation at the time they were granted. Well, Advocate General opinion is not a decision, it's simply an opinion, and what the Advocate General does is summarize the case law as he understands it. So if I were sitting in that court, I would have said, let's see what he has said, even to disagree. Okay, so that is one point. I find that a little bit surprising. But what it is interesting is that obviously does not make any reference to the opinion of the Advocate General, Rantos, because there is no reference whatsoever of substance on what we are talking about, on this governance obligation of the federations. But that order is an appeal of a previous order. That order did mention this type of issue. So we are confronted in a situation where the previous order did what, in my opinion, is a proper analysis of the case law. These are the competences of sporting governing bodies. But the last order to which you are referring does not mention it at all and does not mention the opinion of the Advocate General. What it means, that was your question, is that the interim measures are back unenforceable, so therefore no measure can be adopted to prevent the development of the Super League.
Frank, I just want to go back to the previous point about maybe the tension between the governance role and the commercial role. Do you think that there is a tension, and does the huge amount of money that can go into a certain game, in this case football, does it undermine the spirit of what the European sports model is supposed to be?
As a matter of fact, there's more and more money in sports, in football, and of course this has an impact. This has had an impact concerning especially the application of competition law. This is normal. The more business, then more application of EU law and especially competition law. So nothing is surprising. The problem is that sometimes sports, and especially football, may resemble a pure profit-driven model. I think that's the problem. It's not the case, but it is often perceived as being a profit-driven model. And I think there is maybe what I would call an ethical issue. And maybe sports organizations should be more careful. Maybe they should not seize every business opportunity. Maybe there should be some self-restraint. I take one example that we had to deal before the Ethics Committee of the French Tennis Federation concerning a partnership, commercial partnership with an online betting operator. And as an ethics committee, we say that maybe it's not a good idea for the federation to have this partnership because it's a way to encourage online betting. And we all know the social consequences or the harassment on tennis players when they lose a game where where there was some betting on the game. So we said maybe it's not the role of a federation to have such kind of partnership. And so I think it's more general issue. Do sports organizations have to seize every business opportunity? Maybe they should be more careful and maybe focus more on the regulation of the sports. And so this is what I think as an ethical point of view. On the other end, of course, in the construction of the sports specificities, it was mentioned earlier, there are some responsibilities concerning the good governance, concerning the role in social integration or the promotion of amateur sports. So I think these elements are very important, and they should be taken into consideration by sports organizations, because this is a way of protecting the specificity of sports.
Jose Manuel, I'll come to you. Maybe you can speak on that point actually, and then I'll follow up.
I would like to say that for us it's really important that this opinion and this case finishes. After this case, probably we avoid the possibility of some company to pick some clubs and decide in any sport to organize something. But we cannot avoid, and we want to, that European federations, national federations can talk with private companies and say, we should improve this, we should have better commercial rights of this competition. We have capacity, you probably have more knowledge on this, so let's cooperate. This is one of the things that I mentioned some months ago in the Global Sports Week. It's important that private companies that are interested in sport and European federations, the national federations can talk and then can solve this, not having someone that comes from we don't know where to decide we are going to do something like a closed league, like in the States. So if this case finishes like we expect to do, that could be a very important moment for European federations, for national federations to get the idea of having more companies with them, more to find the way to promote their own sport. So I'm sure that that can be one step. Good governance will also say this. It's important that we can have all stakeholders. I mentioned the athletes before. We mentioned before the fans. In fact, it is important that the whole governing body of a sport can understand this capacity they have and this possibility they have to have other stakeholders, other companies, private companies interested in their sport.
Maybe just finally, because we've got a few minutes, I'll ask everyone if they can 1 minute intervention about going forward and whether you're optimistic that the pyramid can be preserved, strengthened and improved if the judgment goes as expected, or actually maybe there's a risk that some complacency will set in because, well, we won the case and the big existential threat to our model is gone, and therefore that might breed some degree of triumphalism and actually stop the reform effort. Jose, I'm looking at you.
Want me to go?
Yeah.
Well, I have to be optimistic with the pyramid. First, because with the pyramid to as a shorthand of what we are talking about, okay? Why? Because it is in the law as we speak. If there was any doubt, Article 165 has codified that it is in the law. So in the long run, I am optimistic. In the short run, I am pessimistic. Look at the order that you were referring to of the 30th of January of this year. No reference, no recognition, no nothing. So it is going to be a struggle.
I'm optimistic. But as I already said, I think, and Advocate General Arantes said that he see that the court will give, of course, the final opinion about, for example, the solidarity, the redistribution. Is it enough, or should be maybe more? I think the good governance principle I've mentioned a few times already. The involvement of the stakeholders, even some new stakeholders, and especially the supporters. And we don't have the supporters in the pyramid, so it's a pyramid with a sun. put the supporters in like a sun in that picture. I think in the end the European model of sport will upgrade to the next level, and this case will help, I'm pretty much sure, all other sports, not just team sports, but as Jose also said, also individual sports, and that's important that the preservation of the European model of sport can continue.
It's difficult to read in a crystal ball. I don't know if I'm optimistic or pessimistic. I'm sure that the court will rule that there is this legitimate objective, the preservation of the football pyramid. Concerning the proportionality test, I'm not that sure it will succeed. I don't know. There are some arguments for and arguments against, and if we can follow the opinion of Rantos, and everything will be fine. Will it be the position of the court? I have no idea. If let's imagine that the court rules that the system is not working anymore, we have to change the treaty, which would be quite difficult. So I hope that Article 165 will be convincing enough for the court to preserve that system.
And finally, Jose Manuel.
Yeah, optimistic, definitely. Well, my feeling is that after this case, we will have this solidarity mechanism improving. And when we talk, no one talked about this, but UEFA distributes 85% of the revenues of their competitions to national federations, well, to their programs. 85 is good. International Olympic Committee distributes 90% of their revenues. It's a little bit better, but obviously the intention is that all European federations can distribute, can make more money and distribute to the base of the pyramid, to the grassroots clubs that should be helped because they are the base of sport in Europe. So I suppose for us, during COVID-19, our main concern was the clubs. In fact, we saw that the clubs decreased the number of athletes. We have other physical activities, gyms, getting more people. But in fact, the base of this whole world of sport in Europe is the club, the volunteer, those who are working with getting no money, but having the hope to have someone that goes from the beginning to the top. And they can say, as I can say in Portugal, when you say that a club in Madeira starts with Cristiano Ronaldo and by the end he comes to be the first in the world, they say he started here. It started with me. I was the coach that started this start. This is important, and this feedback is very important for all clubs that are at this level.
Brilliant, thank you. I'm going to hand over to Christophe now with some questions.
Yes, many questions on this panel. Unfortunately, we have problems of timekeeping, so I will just take two of them. They are not named, so maybe any one of you who want to answer is welcome. The first one is from Holger Preus, professor at University of Mainz. It's about solidarity. We have been talking a lot about solidarity today, including as a legitimate objective recognized by the European Court of Justice. And I think we all think that we need more solidarity in the current system. And the question was, how can we achieve, in fact, more solidarity? Should the largest leagues also contribute to the European solidarity efforts? And could we envisage a truly European solidarity model where everybody, UEFA, national federations and leagues, contributes to this solidarity? So I don't know, it's about this European solidarity effort. How can we achieve it, in fact? I don't know who wants to answer.
It's almost a question for Matteo, no? Rather than the panel.
I have already answered to this because, in fact, when we talk about the capacity of European federations to distribute their revenues, it's the most important, and we have to give signs to all governing bodies in Europe for all sports that they should invest in grassroots clubs and put the money got in the top of the pyramid in the bottom.
Yes, I think it was also regarding the legal tools that we can use about that in order to maybe implement a tax, such as in France we have the tax buffet, or to implement regulations such as salary caps or so on. So what tools can be used without, in fact, taking into account that the clubs should remain autonomous, because this has been discussed too. So what legal tools can be used? I don't know, Vania, you didn't want to answer to that question, but
that's a difficult question with legal tools. But I just wanted to say, for example, in other sports, the issue is about the revenue distribution. We already heard today that UEFA is redistributing more than 90% of their revenue, so 3 billion euros are redistributed to the clubs. Not just those that are competing in the UEFA competition, but also other national clubs. So when a club plays in the Champions League of a small country like Croatia or Luxembourg, all other clubs that are competing in the first division will get some revenue. And for some smaller clubs, €500,000, 1 million euro, it's more than half of the budget. So that's something that helps a lot the academia. And those money should be spent for the development of youth, for the academia, and that's important. In other sports, and also UEFA is redistributing money to its member federations for some other project, Hat-Trick, or some other project where they build the infrastructure, help rebuilding the infrastructure for some, it maybe sounds bad, but in some poorer country that don't have the money to build, to invest in infrastructure, that project can help a lot. In basketball, for example, if you want to organize an event, you must ask your government to give you money to actually set a competition. You will not get any money from the FIBA Europe, unfortunately, and it's the same story from the other sports. And that is the problem. Because of lack of revenue distribution in basketball, we had the case like we had because the federation were unable to, or they're unwilling to stop the clubs working on those breakout leagues.
Maybe a last topic about this question. In the case that we would have a public or private regulation trying to implement solidarity, would there be a threat that it could be considered as anti-competitive? I think that it's not a threat at all, because once again, in France we have the tax buffet, which is based on the TV rights, for example. So no threat at all. We can try to push in order to increase this solidarity. You think we have legal tools right now?
It's a difficult question. I think that it's in the power of the federation, the European federation, that have the power to redistribute with their rules that money, like some other do. And then we will have some redistribution in other sports and development of other sports.
Okay, thank you very much. And you were talking about basketball. So the last question is coming from Emily Wisnowski, Legal Affairs Manager at FIBA. It's not fully about basketball, but maybe we'll discuss after the conference about what you just said. The question is, and once again you can answer, whoever wants to answer, is it true that a structural separation between regulatory and commercial functions of sports governing bodies is not required under EU law? We discussed a bit about that, but not very precisely. I don't know, Frank, maybe, or whoever you want.
I can give an answer from a competition law point of view, and the answer is no, it is not required. And it has happened in one sport, to the best of my knowledge, it is automotive, but it was a proposal by those subject to the investigation. But EU law does not, EU competition law does not impose such an obligation as such. And by the way, Rantos makes reference to that point, from competition law point of view.
Okay, I think that's perfectly answered to the question, so thank you very much. Thank you all for this panel and this debate. Thank you, Marine, also.